we would have to all of a sudden, here's what might result in a downgrade for the electric system if we said, you know, we're gonna forget that, let's get up in here sometime, or we go back here and say, I want all of that to be debt. That's really not realistic, but let's say we, for the sake of argument, said that. So all $750 million in debt. Well, your debt ratio is gonna go way up here probably. Your debt coverage is gonna come way down here, close to what you actually, the minimum absolute level, if you have any bond covenants. And the rating agencies would say, well, you know, you're probably gonna go to junk bond status if you did something like that. But I know that's not realistic, but somewhere within that range, then you're talking about some type of downgrade. The key
That's
thing,
not a threshold to trigger.
yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, what's reasonable, but if we went too far above that, really what the impact is gonna be, what they're gonna look at is this over here. If this starts dropping well below 3.0 on a consistent basis, that's what's trying to trigger a downgrade faster than usually is.
Well, when the graph on the left, there's two ways to keep your debt service below 45. One of them is to have less debt, one of them is to have more revenue. So
That's
it's
correct.
the growing amount of debt.
That's correct.
Still a percentage. Do we anticipate at any point in the future we'll have less debt than the year before?
Absolute level? No.
Yeah. Okay.
No. That,
It'll
now,
be a lower percentage.
in gas,
Here.
gas we will.
Okay.
That's the only one that we'll be able to say. Okay.
So we gotta grow.
Growth is good.
Because we know the debt's gonna keep growing, so we've gotta have revenue.
Other sources of revenue beyond just raising your rates is a very good thing. And growth provides that. If you can land large commercial and industrial customers that want to come, that's why we work so close with economic development agencies. You know, that's a godsend.
Well, I think it's critical for our purposes, because we can't just keep raising rates to keep the percentage down. But we know we can keep it very down if we continue to do the
1,400 new every year. That's involved. So if we don't meet that, then we've got.
Okay. Looking at, we saw this last month, but our residential bill comparison for electric, we're at $103, so sort of in the middle of the pack of the big 8 TVA distributors. That's actually $102.50. If we said, okay, we're going to do the $1.50s for the next 3 years, how does that impact this? It adds $4.50 to the monthly bill, raises it to $107. It doesn't change our current competitive position, but what I'll tell you is that all of these other electric utilities will have at least one, if not more than one rate increase over that period of time too. So my projection is, if I'm standing here in 2020, we're actually back, going to be behind Huntsville and Memphis. We'll be back to third lowest. Okay, gas system. Operating and capital expenditures, again, really focused on maintaining a reliable and safe utility system for our gas customers. Our service territory, mostly Knox County, almost 100,000 total gas services, about 90% of those are residential. Relatively a newer system compared to the other 3 systems, and we've talked about that before. We still have the main replacement programs, cast iron ductile iron out soon. Then we turn our attention to the bare steel main, and that'll be out of the system by 2035. One thing that's good, be good for our customers, is really from the outset, we see smaller residential bill increases than we've had in the past for Century 2. They've been $1 the past 3 years. We see it in 50 cents increase on the monthly bill going forward. Some of the natural gas system investments. We talked about the steel main. We have, I guess 100 miles in our 10-year plan. That's about 10 miles per year on average, of course, $24 million total. Steel main is another type that, as it ages, it becomes a little bit more difficult to maintain, a little bit more costly to replace, more repair and work on. So we want to get that out of the system 10 miles a year. We'll have about, this will get about half of the steel main out. We'll still have a good number of miles to replace. I think we're on target to have it all out by 2035 if we stay at this pace. As far as a large system improvement project, we have a high pressure gas main that actually extends from near downtown over Bernard Avenue where our old gas control center and gas operations used to be, extends down Middlebrook Pike and ultimately ends up in downtown West. So a 6-mile stretch of that pipe does need to be replaced sometime over the next 10 years. It's actually about a 3 or 4 year project, and it has a price tag of about $30 million on it. It is steel main, and it will be replaced with also steel main, just given the high pressure associated with the gas flow on that size of the pipe. And we also have $13 million in the system to upgrade the gas meters as part of the advanced meter deployment. For most gas meters, the meter itself isn't being replaced. We're putting a communication device on the meter itself to be able to do what we need to do remotely as far as reading and et cetera. So that's why if you're saying electric's this much and water's this much, gas is the smallest of the three.
Please make sure you do that replacement project sometime a long time after
After
is finished, so we don't get blamed for that too.
You got it. Okay, the key assumptions and indicators for the gas plant, I'm just going to mention now those that are different from electric, and that's what I'll do with water and wastewater too. For gas, we have a winter weather assumption that we factor into our sales revenue projections. We project that winter is going to be 5% warmer than normal. Last year, it was very mild. It was actually 20% milder or warmer than normal. So we got clobbered on our margin last year, even though we had this assumption. Now, the 2 winters prior to that were both 5% colder than normal, so that helped out. We still think this is a valid assumption, but we continue to monitor it like we do all our assumptions, and if we certainly talk to the board if we need to make that a higher percentage. Beginning with the gas, and you'll see this on water and wastewater too, building in a 1% annual decline in residential use. So this has nothing to do with weather. This has to basically do with more efficient appliances, conservation, et cetera, but the trends we see from our usage, and we've talked about this before. So every year we build in a little bit less, a little bit less. Water and wastewater, we do it for business customers as well. We haven't really seen that trend so much in gas for business customers, but certainly in the residential side. You see the annual customer additions, a little bit less than electric. I think that adds up to 12,500 total over the 10-year plan. And the only thing else I'll mention is the debt ratio for gas, 35% or less. And gas, relatively newer system, relatively lower capital requirements in the past and even going forward, so not as much debt in gas as you have in the other systems. Capital program, $242 million total. That averages to $24 million per year. You can see a bit of a spike in 2022. That's a portion of the cost of that high-pressure main, 6-mile high-pressure main replacement. Funding, 70% revenue, 30% debt. This is the only system that we wouldn't have a bond issue every year of the 10-year plan. The capital structure or funding structure for the gas system, target 35% or less. We're actually a little bit above that now. It will trend down and end actually a little bit below 30%. And the debt service coverage for gas, 3.0 target. Looking pretty good, especially those outer 2 years of the plan when a bond issue fully matures. 2018, it falls a little bit below. That's really a function of some O&M programs being deferred to 2018 and the spending for those programs. That's one of the reasons 2017 is relatively higher. Now, again, this in of itself, the look from S&P and Moody's isn't going to be that big of a deal. But if we showed them a plan that every year was below that dotted line, then that's a concern. Rate increases for gas, we've really already talked about this, but what we see, 50 cents per year on the monthly bill, and really that trend continuing over time. And obviously we're very mindful of, I guess you could say, our competitive position on residential gas rates. And you can see that here. We're hoping that the 50-cent increases, we can still do what we need to do in our main replacement programs and our system improvements, but a little bit of a less burden on the residential gas customer. And with that, at the end, 3 years from now, the monthly bill is going to go essentially from $53.50 to $55. So a $1.50 increase. And our goal is, when we show this to you in 2020, that we would be, somewhere over in here as opposed to being the highest. Any questions on gas? Okay, water system. Water system, the system territory primarily, the city of Knoxville, we have about 10,000 of our 76,000 water services that are actually located in the county. I'm sorry, it's not 10,000, about 10% of those services are actually located outside the city limits. Our programs, our capital, our O&M are really focused on maintaining high quality water supply and reliable water supply for our customers over time. We know how important that is, of course. It's also important in trying to attract new industry to Knoxville. You remember Fresenius Medical Care, huge water and wastewater customer located here. One of the primary reasons they cited was the quality and the reliability of KUB's water supply. So it is very important, even for attracting new industry to Knoxville. In addition to the continuing pipe replacement, which on average is a 1% per year of system mains for the water system, we also have really a significant amount of dollars invested in plant redundancy. You know, when you look at our water system, we have like 24 pump stations, 27 storage facilities, 1,400 miles of main, but only one treatment plant. So several years ago, we had a team, a strategic initiative that looked at the risk associated with just having one plant, especially for a system our size. And we beat a whole bunch of alternatives. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But some of the key water system investments, 155 miles of main replacement, $91 million to do that over the next 10 years. That removes all the galvanized pipe from the system. That makes a pretty good dent in getting the cement cast iron main removed from the system as well. We have $15 million for some improvement projects at Mark V. Whitaker treatment plant. This is aside from the plant redundancy projects. One of the big ones here is to put in a new disinfection system. We currently have a chlorine gases dioxide disinfection system. We're basically a step ahead of the regulations that are going to force that we move to a puree-based, essentially a bleach system for disinfection purposes. That's about a $6 million project in total. A couple of other upgrades. We have 24 pumping booster stations in the water system. They really help regulate and push the water out to our customers. We have a couple of those stations that are going to be completely rebuilt over the next 10 years. So we have $12 million total for that. And then for the meter upgrades for the water system, $22 million total. We're actually replacing the water meters, 78,000 meters total to be replaced over the next 4 years.
Will they still have to be read by a human?
No. Just like electric, just like gas, remote read. Water plant redundancy. I know we've shared this with the board before, and Mr. Elmore talked about it, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but basically, in looking at having one plant, we looked at an alternative of what about a second plant somewhere else on our water system when this team was formed several years ago. The price tag for that was over $250 million. So we said, don't know about that. What are some alternatives, more viable alternatives, less costly alternatives? And we basically settled on coming up with a redundant treatment train process, which is a number of facilities basically replicating the treatment process on the property that's located adjacent to Riverside Drive. And that includes a new high service pump station, additional filters, but basically putting the facilities to have a treatment process in place if something happened to the existing plant infrastructure or we needed to take it down for significant maintenance, we've got another source that we can use. A big part of that is what's called the dual intake, and it's actually getting a new source of water upstream of our current intake on the Tennessee River. And you have probably a couple of miles of piping to bring it in, but of course the Holston and French Broad converge to make the Tennessee, and this would be a new intake. I guess it's up on the Holston, if I recall correctly, and then the piping to bring it back. So if there was a contamination, a spill near the plant on the Tennessee River, we could shut that intake down and bring it from upstream. Water financial plan assumptions real quickly. What's different? Really the debt ratio. 50% or less for the water division, and we're looking at actually somewhat higher levels of debt in water, whereas we're going down in gas and going down somewhat in wastewater. water, it's going to be increasing a bit. The 10-year capital plan for water, $352 million, $35 million per year. Some slight spikes. That's the water plant redundancy projects that are spread throughout the 10 years. The 10-year funding for the $352 million, debt 56%, revenue 44%. So you see the debt ratio, which is currently about 47%, begin to increase slightly. It'll get up to 52% and then come back down and actually settle at 50% at the end of the 10 years. And the debt service coverage, our target for water is 2.0 or greater. We will consistently achieve that projected over the 10 years. Rates for water, what we're looking at as far as monthly bill increases, $2 on each of the next 3 years, and then it will begin to drop to $1.50 and then to $1 by 2024. Historically, if you look back since we've had Century 2 water, 5 of the last 6 have been $1. 1 was $2. So what's changed? Well, this is really to help fund the water plant redundancy, the $120 million. We sort of layered that on top of Century 2 rates and debt, increase in debt, and somewhat of a higher increase in the residential bill, and water rates in general will help fund that. So as far as our bill comparison, $23, the current monthly bill for water. So you can see how we compare with some other large water utilities and the local utility districts. You add $6 on that, would be at $29. So our competitive position would change a couple of places, but again, I will assure you that this cast of characters here will also have increases over that period of time, and I would project that we would be third lowest of this group in 2020 as well. Moving on to wastewater. You can see the service territory there. Again, mostly the city of Knoxville. 90% of the customers are residential. Big news on wastewater. I guess I'll summarize it. Consent decree. We have some plan improvement projects that are due to be completed, required by the CD in 2021. So we hope we'll achieve that. We'll get that done, and hopefully the consent decree will be put to bed then. We'll continue with our regular pipe replacement programs at the same pace that we had for the collection system during phase 10 at 2% per year. That's built into the 10-year plan. But because of the lesser capital requirements, after the consent decree is completed, both debt and rate growth is going to slow, which is good. 22 miles a year of main replacement, $264 million in the capital plan for that. $64 million to upgrade treatment plants. That's in addition to the work at KUB that's related to the consent decree. This is, we have 4 wastewater treatment plants. A portion of that $64 million is to put in new disinfection systems like we're doing at MBW for water, putting in a new disinfection system for each of the 4 treatment plants for wastewater. And then the big ticket is $58 million in improvements at KUB to complete the CD-related work. And that is, in part, a biological enhanced clarification process. Did I say that one? That's a big part of those dollars. As far as what's different in wastewater, customer additions a little bit higher than what we see in water. We're projecting 2,800 over the 10-year period. But the debt ratio, which our target has been over the life of phase 10, and the consent decree is 65% or less. I put an arrow there because that is going to be going down over time. And as a result, increasing or bringing some financial flexibility to the wastewater system. Our 10-year capital program will average $47 million per year. You can see sort of a point of distinction on the 10-year capital chart that once we complete the consent decree in 2021, the level of capital begins to drop. Because that begins to drop, we're not going to need as much debt. The funding, 48% debt, 52% revenue. That has been consistently 60 or 70%, I guess, over the last 10 or 15 years when we were looking at this at a snapshot. So that is now changing. And as a result, the debt ratio for wastewater, we're right at our target limit of 65% now. We'll begin to trend down and actually end the plan at 56%. While still maintaining a solid coverage, and actually some years quite a bit above the 1.5 of the target. So what this does really brings financial flexibility to the wastewater division. Why is that important? I mean, virtually today, I submit we have very little, if any. If, God forbid, you had another type of order to do something on the wastewater system, or if that decline in use for wastewater picked up rapidly, if there was some other type of unanticipated external shock to the wastewater system that drives up costs. Right now, we don't have a whole lot to do to respond to that, other than cut costs somewhere else, or if you can't do that, raise rates. Having this flexibility, if you had large unanticipated capital expenditures, is good to have. It's good to have for all our systems, and it's good that we can now maybe build some of that into the wastewater plant. And at the same time, though, have lower residential bill increases over time. What we are seeing for the next 3 years is to continue with what we did the last 3 years and have a $3 increase on the monthly bill each year. But then that would begin to decline to $2 and to $1.50. And we'll work hard, and I'd like to get that down to $1 by those last 3 years if possible. And cost management, operating efficiencies efforts can maybe help us in that regard. And as far as comparisons, you've seen this before where we are. We put our last $3 increase added into what you saw in September. So that is our average monthly bill now. And of course, if you added the $9 on top of it, obviously we're more competitive with the consent decree cities. And what I would tell you with these particular cities and wastewater systems, that they'll have increases as well. So we're not going to find ourselves over here in 3 years. I know that's a lot.
So we
Questions?
talked about also about an $8 per month increase in a average customer bill.
If you added them up. But there's a fallacy in doing that because you might want to assume that everybody has all those services, but only 17% of the households in our entire service territory have all 4 services. And when we have our future meetings, we'll have more detail on that so you can see the specifics on that. But yeah, it's easy because even ourselves, sometimes we had conversations, say, well, add all those up, and they just reminded us, hey, you can't do that.
Maximum would be
Maximum, that is correct.
Question. So we have, KUB has water and wastewater because the city of Knoxville didn't manage it.
That's true wastewater,
properly.
through the sewer system.
Right, and so we inherited it and all the aging infrastructure. So inside our service area, there are also other water and wastewater utilities that are kind of.
Within our entire, yes.
Within the county.
That is correct.
Is there any contingency planning, the possibility that we find ourselves in that same situation of a utility we might have to acquire because of financial problems? Is there any, you know, we make these assumptions and there's always that left-hand hook out of nowhere. So is there any contingency planning and reserves and that kind of thing that kind of goes into some of that, or if we found ourselves being forced to acquire a utility that failed?
As far as our water system itself, we do have certain levels of cash reserves that we put aside that we are required to maintain. So we have some of that. That's pretty much used for if there was an issue on our system and we're really not to use it. If there was a failure of a utility district, then hypothetically, and we were forced or asked to take that over, that would be the product of a lot of significant discussions with their governing body, probably with the county, with the state, with the water funding board and all of that. And
Let me just challenge the premise that we'd be forced to take it over. This board right here would have to vote to do that. No one can force you to do that. We've been asked at times when we have multiple districts that have issues such as East Knox in the 1980s to do that. And the people who were here then looked at it, and it was in the best interest of KUB's customers to do it, so they voted for it. I don't think this board or any future board would vote for it if it was not in the best interest of KUB's customers. So it's this board's decision when and if that ever happens.
I would add too that there's a natural linkage between the water system and the wastewater system that existed at the time of the acquisition. The difference among a freestanding water utility district is that they are much more freestanding.
Right.
And so there is not necessarily a logical linkage that says if it's failing, if it has to be acquired by someone, it has to be by KUB, or it should be by KUB. It could be by one of the other districts, or it could be considered a standalone and somebody else take over the
Or
operation.
privatized.
Right,
Yeah.
sure.
I'd say,
When we took Northeast Knox Utility District, we took a portion, and Hallsdale
That's right.
Powell, Hallsdale Powell took a
We
portion.
split it up, right?
I'd say my biggest concern would be if the consent decree came and the interest rates are really high,
Oh, yeah.
what would we do? Because I think, isn't part of our debt still some of those old high?
We've refinanced.
I know we've refinanced.
We've refinanced a lot.
Yeah,
I think most of our debt, historically speaking, is relatively low cost. There's just a lot of it, and extends out over a long period of time. But it's a good point, because in these assumptions that we have, if interest rates really began to shoot up dramatically, and say as opposed to what we projected, they're 5 or 6%, then you've got to rethink your funding approach. And maybe you have to rethink your levels of investment too. That's just part of the whole balanced plan approach with customers and reliability and affordability.
When we were here 8 years ago, coming up with this plan